will this duo be a success or a failure?
I think it's certainly possible. I don't think this season is the season to properly evaluate them. I mean, just everything we know about playoff basketball. I've pointed this out on the show before, but you need a certain amount of defensive front court talent to have any chance to win the title. Just look at every defensive front court that's won the title in the last like 30 years. And you're not like the weakest one you'll find in there is maybe like, you know, Dirk Nowitzki and Tyson Chandler, who Tyson Chandler was an awesome rim protector at that point, right? Like you're just not going to be able to compete in the NBA playoffs without real defensive front court versatility. And so a lot of it's played out exactly like we expected. We talked about a real secondary ball handler to help with usage and things along those lines, and to give a different kind of change up to Luka, elevating them on offense, but then really, really struggling on the defensive end. And that's exactly what's happened. So here's the lineup data so far since Kyrie's come to Dallas. With both Luka and Kyrie on the floor in 109 possessions, they are plus 10.5 net with a defensive rating of 121. So they're beating the crap out of teams despite giving up an egregious amount of points. And it's because they have an offensive rating up over 131 points per 100 possessions. When Kyrie's on the floor without Luka, they've had 199 possessions of that so far. A 116 defensive rating, 123 offensive rating, plus 7 net. That's about as good as you're ever going to do without Luka in this era. Probably worth mentioning, and this is, you know, I was talking about this with Ryan shortly after this all went down. But dude, he went right away with one practice and beat the Clippers and the Kings on the road without Luka. Like that, you know? And it always bothered me during this whole debate how everyone focused on the issues with Kyrie while completely glossing over the fact that he is an unbelievably good basketball player. So you're seeing that benefit already there. And then this season with Luka and no Kyrie and 3,500 possessions, obviously because it's a full season, they have a 120 offensive rating and a 116 defensive rating. So they're getting really good, like Luka quality offense, even when Luka's off the floor, which is the huge advantage there. Now, I think from a actual basketball standpoint, and I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, there's a lot more tempo and pace to the way they're playing. Now, not necessarily in pushing and transition, because I was looking at the numbers. They were a 12% transition frequency without Kyrie and a 13% with him, so not much of a tick up there. But in the half court, there's just a lot more quickness of decision making with Kyrie on the floor. And I think a lot of that is Kyrie initiating possessions just because he makes quicker decisions and he's not the super methodical approach that Luka has. But even when Luka's had the ball, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, Carson, but even Luka's making quicker decisions, knowing that if it leads to an opportunity for Kyrie to run second side action or for them to move the ball a little bit more, they're getting better stuff out of that. And you're seeing that reflected in the offensive ratings. But I thought they were literally the worst watch in basketball this season for guys like us who have to watch it and have to watch the good teams. I hated watching them the most because it was just so predictable. And I love Luka, but the television product, it was just so every possession looked the same. Adding Kyrie to this mix has made it a must-watch team for me. And that's just a testament to the way that he's kind of made their offense more palatable. And I think it invigorates the team. Like in that game, that comeback game against Minnesota where Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels shut them down on the final possession, the energy that was flowing through that arena as Kyrie led that comeback was palpable. And I think that there's something to be said about stagnation and the effect it has on the energy of off-ball players versus pace and tempo and movement and the way that keeps players engaged. I think Kyrie has been monumentally good for them offensively. Now, the defensive end is going to be a problem, but that was never going to be something they could address within this season. That's going to be something they can look at this offseason. And the beauty of it is, because of how damn good Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic are, you can do things like get severely offensively limited players because they're pull-up shooters, because Luka's such a half-court surgeon. You can go after front court players that have severe offensive deficiencies that specialize in like a guy like Stanley Johnson might be someone they look at even within this season to shore them up on the wing. But they need they need to reform the front court in the offseason to have a real chance to compete. But I love this deal simply because of the fact that it makes them such a more fun and fluid offensive basketball team.
I completely agree that the offensive fit is dreamlike, and that's how I thought it would look. And in practice, it's been perfect. I mean, Kyrie is the ideal complement to Luka, and there were some people who were talking about how they thought it was two ball dominant guards playing together, which it really isn't. And we've seen Kyrie consistently play that complementary role to a more ball dominant star. If it's LeBron, if it's playing with both Harden and KD, he is that quicker decision maker. He is obviously a brilliant isolation and pick and roll scorer who can attack mismatches and go get you a bucket quickly. And he's also a great spot up player. And, he's even increased his volume there, obviously playing alongside Luka. And he was an 88th percentile spot up guy this season in Brooklyn. So I think that the fit is great there. You mentioned how brilliant they've been offensively. I do think, though, if you're expecting Dallas to contend this season, it's not going to happen because of what you laid out. I thought that game against Minnesota was a defensive abomination. And I think that overall we've seen them unable to stop people at the point of attack and then unable to challenge them at the rim. Like, since they added Kyrie, they're allowing opposing teams to shoot 75% inside 5 feet, Jason. That's 4% worse than any other team in the league. And they're allowing the most makes per game in that area because it's like, Christian Wood with his limited drop coverage is not intimidating anybody. Dwight Powell is not intimidating anybody, especially when you're dealing with two liabilities at the point of attack who you have to play for 35 minutes a night because they're by so far your best players. So I agree with you. I think this is a move that you look at as being a potential elevator into contention for next year because they have movable contracts with THJ. Maybe Bertans, you can attach a pick and get off that money at least. Reggie Bullock is another like mid-level size contract, although I think they probably want to keep him, and they've got a couple expirings this year. So it's concerning to me still being invested in Kyrie. As good as he may be at basketball, it's just frightening to have him on an expiring deal, and you never know when the volatility is going to come into play, and they're not good enough yet. And so that's what's a bit scary is that it's no like, oh man, well, if Kyrie goes insane after this year, at least we had our shot at a title because they don't have that shot at a title yet. They're 24th in defensive rating. We've never seen a team that bad on that end make the finals. And so I think the precedent there is clear, but they are really good offensively. And you're right. I mean, if they shore up the wings down the line, yes, then this absolutely could be a true contending team.
That's super interesting. Like, I'm making the case for Kyrie as a long-term upside. And the long-term element is what's so terrifying about Kyrie.
Yes.
Now, I will say that I think Mark Cuban is crazy enough to give him what he wants. And I also think that there are severe limitations for other teams to obtaining him because sign and trades get super complicated from the standpoint of like hard capping you. So like if the Lakers wanted him, it's like you've got kind of two options. Like if Anthony Davis plays awesome down the stretch of the season, you look to maybe do a sign and trade deal with D'Angelo Russell, but then you have to get the Mavericks on board. So you might have to give up picks. And then now even if you do a double sign and trade with D'Lo and Kyrie, you're immediately hard capping yourself, which limits your ability this offseason to add talent around those guys. There's a bunch of like different elements that make it super complicated. And I think it really just comes down to Mark Cuban writes the check after the season. So I'm less worried about that. The one last thing that I thought you said that was super interesting before we move on is that spotting up part. You know, Spencer Dinwiddie was a good off-ball option in Dallas, and there are nights where he looks like an all-star. But the one gigantic chasm, and I do think Kyrie is a much better on-ball player than Dinwiddie, that goes without saying. But where an even larger chasm exists is in that spotting up element because Spencer Dinwiddie is a very streaky jump shooter. And in a spot up situations is someone that defenses feel at least somewhat comfortable conceding shots to. Whereas with Kyrie Irving, it's like that thing's going in every single time if you leave him open. And so that element is a huge part of their complementary offense together. But I thought you laid it out pretty well. It's a long-term upside with a player that you don't feel comfortable having a long-term attachment to. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge for them.
And it's like you said, it had to be long-term because they couldn't get it all done this year. They had two clear needs on this roster, really high-level second creator, and then that front court defense. And they had to compromise one of those, giving up Dorian Finney-Smith to then gain a much better player in the category that is probably, well, I don't know if it's more important to their long-term ceiling. I think they really need both, but Kyrie is that first building block, you hope, alongside Luka. But man, does it scare me, because you just don't know, dude. I mean, he teamed up with, his best buddy. And then, of course, the Nets are sort of incompetent. That fell apart. He left LeBron James in 3 straight finals to go to, the most talented young core in the league, and then wasn't happy with that. Like, it's just a really scary guy to be invested in. So we will see how that plays out over the home stretch of this season and the coming years.